الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. شاه است حسین بادشاه است حسین، دین است حسین دین پناه است حسین. سرداد نداد دست در دست یزید، حقا کے بنائے لا الہ است حسین. بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات. فاطمہ کے چین نے، علی کے نور عین نے، با خدا حسین نے دین کو بچا لیا. حرف آ رہا تھا دین مصطفیٰ کے نام پر، منبر رسول بک رہا تھا تخت شام پر. دین کی احساس نے، دست حق شناس نے، امت محمدی کو خواب سے جگا دیا. با خدا حسین نے، اور ہر طرف سے بند ہو چکے تھے حق کے راستے. خون مانگتا تھا دین زندگی کے واسطے، تو دین کے اصول نے، نائب رسول نے، زندگی کا قرض اپنے خون سے چکا دیا. با خدا حسین نے. ہولناکیوں میں موت کے حیات کھو گئی، اور کفر کی گھٹا اسی راہ نجات کھو گئی. سکائے ذوالجلال نے، سیدہ کے لال نے، ایسے وقت میں شعور آگہی عطا کیا. دین کو بچا لیا، اور میر شام بن گیا تھا سانپ آستین کا. خسروی کے سر پہ رکھ رہا تھا تاج دین کا. بادشاہ دین نے بوریا نشین نے، آرزو خسروی کو خاک میں ملا دیا. دین کو بچا لیا، پھر سے شرک کی طرف پلٹ نہ جائے آدمی، اور راہ مستقیم سے بھٹک نہ جائے آدمی. شاہ تشنا گام نے، اور وقت کے امام نے، حق کی راہ پر لہو سے ایک دیا جلا دیا. دین کو بچا لیا، اور بڑھتے بڑھتے بات جب اصول دین پہ آ گئی، اور یزیدیت کی شکل میں عروج پا گئی. بڑھ کے پھر دلیر نے، شیر حق کے شیر نے، دوپہر میں تخت و تاج قصر شام ڈا دیا. दीन को बचा लिया। हल्के बेजुबान से और जुल्म की, हल्के बेजमान से जुल्म की कमान तोड़ दी। शरगे गुलू से खंजरों की धार मोड़ दी। नाजिश हयात ने, फख्र कायनात ने सर कटा के आदमी का सर बुलंद कर दिया। दिल कहाँ से लाऊं जो करूं ये वाक़या बयां। 3 दिन की प्यास में वो हौसला था अल्लमा। जुल्म के असीर ने, रन में एक सगीर ने मुस्कुरा के फौज शाम को रुला रुला दिया। दीन को बचा लिया। लाख जानो दिल निसार सैयदे इनाम पर, रो दिया फलक भी किसी तश्न गाम पर। और अपने माह जबीन को, दिल बरे हुसैन को खींच कर गले से तीर जब गले लगा लिया। फातिमा के चैन ने, अली के नूरे ऐन ने, बाखुदा हुसैन ने दीन को बचा लिया। सलवात मोहम्मद वाले मोहम्मद।
Assalamu alaikum. We are at day number 3 of this 5-day Arbaeen program at this center, Razavi Community Center. Inshallah, we'll continue until Arbaeen Day, which is on Sunday. Tomorrow, Saturday, in the morning, we'll have the Fajr's Jamaat Salat as a usual program, inshallah, 5 o'clock in the morning. So, Jamaat Salat, anyone can join, ladies, gents. We have breakfast. After that, we have outdoor activities, sports. So, if you can join us, anyone who can, every Saturdays. Tomorrow the program will start 6:45. We'll start a little bit early. This way we have more time for lecture, majlis, and inshallah for more recitation. So 6:45 will start tomorrow, Saturday, and also tomorrow after the Isha Salat, we will have a youth interactive discussion. So right after the Jamaat Salat, we'll have refreshments at Tabarruk tea, inshallah, and then we start the youth interactive session with Dr. Syed Shabbir Kirmani. And on Arbaeen Day, which is on Sunday, we'll start with Zohar Salat. 1:22 will start the Jamaat Salat, followed by immediately with the Arbaeen program, inshallah. And then we will have full Niyaz on Sunday. That is the Arbaeen Day, inshallah. Every Shab Jummah, we have a regular program. We start with the Yasin, Dua Kumail, short lecture, followed by Jamaat Salat and Ziyarat-e Warsa. We start 7 o'clock on Thursdays, and Jummah Salat also we have regular every Fridays, inshallah. Request for the Surah Fatiha for the sponsors of tonight Tabarruk. For them, their marhumin, all their marhumin, these marhumin that we remember, marhumin of Ghulam Hussain Mauladina family, Ghulam Hussain Khaki family, Musa Virji family, Ahmad Nanji Kara family, Ramzan Ali Manik, Leela Bai Manik, Amir Bar Sundar, Yasin Rahim, Yusuf Ali Ghulam Hussain Mauladina, marhum Inayat Ali Manik, marhum Nazir Ghulam Hussain, marhum Fida Ghulam Hussain, marhum Amina Bai Jivraj, all the Hazreen, their marhumin, anyone who had donated, contributed, recited anywhere or served the cause of Ahl Bayt anywhere in the world, for all of them, their marhumin, Akul Mu'minin and Mu'minat, Muslimin and Muslimat, Al-Fatiha. And now, with your loud salawat, I'll request Maulana Sayyid Shabbir Kirmani to come to the mimbar and start his majlis. For Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. Allah.
فاتحة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أم حسبت أن أصحاب الكهف والرقيم كانوا من آياتنا عجبا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here in Canada or across the globe, wherever you may be hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: why are we here? We've been discussing in the past few nights this notion of the eternal renaissance of the Husseini movement. That is, how does the movement of Imam Hussein alayhi salam teach us about the essence of the Quran and how we can live and revive our spirits and our hearts through this zikr and this understanding, and how it reflects the movement of the Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt at large to allow us to get to a higher spiritual realm. And in that, we opened up a few questions in the last few nights about, for example, what is the future of our community? What is Kamal? What is Ta'arrub Ba'd al-Hijra? And many of these things. And tonight, inshallah, I look to expand on the concept of Kamal and the concept of Ihsan. And why are they important? And what do they have to do with us as human beings, as individuals? And ultimately, this will open a door which allows us to pursue a path of understanding why Allah created us, and where are we on that journey, and what do we need to do, and what is it that we can potentially do in order to fulfill our potential as insan. To this end, we talked about a few things the other night and the previous nights, and we said that we need some tools of this journey. We need to know, for example, the limitations of our knowledge, jahl al-basit, jahl al-murakkab. We have to know what we know, we have to know what we don't know, and the limitations of it. We have to have the openness to know that there may be a different perspective that I did not consider. Allah says in the Quran, وَفَوْقَ كُلِّ ذِي عِلْمٍ عَلِيمٍ. Above every knower is one who knows more. And that is what we get from the essence of the story of Musa and Khidr. That even if you're an ulul azm prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one should not think that I've got it all figured out. That is, there's still more to figure out. There is still more to understand in the spiritual realm and beyond. So tonight, I want to unpack this notion of why did Allah make us? What does it have to do with Kamal? What does it have to do with Ihsan? And what is it that the movement of Karbala teaches us about being ourselves in the full sense? What does the movement of Karbala teach us about solving some of these problems and these dilemmas? And how does the movement of Karbala give us a paradigm on how we act in this life in order to get excellence not only in the akhirah but in this dunya, in this world? What was the history of Islam? What are the lessons that you learned that help us understand some of these things? The next thing is, what are some of the thought approaches that you and I may need to take and understand and reflect on in order to see this in a different light, in a different way? That is, when I look at and I think about the future of my community, future can mean a few things. And I need to define it and I need to understand it. Does it mean a year or two? Does it mean 20 years down the line? Does it mean 100 years down the line? And what can we learn from the teachings of the Quran, the teachings of what the Ahlul Bayt told us? And ultimately, what does society tell us in order for us to excel and progress? And of course, inshallah, tonight, being the nights of Arbaeen of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, we will connect our hearts there, which allow us to make sure that our spiritual hearts are beating and we are alive. Walaikum salam. This is our agenda for tonight, inshallah. Wherever you are here in Hamilton or across the globe, sana salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, I'll take this few moments to mention this. On this journey, you may find that sometimes there are things that I may say or anybody from the member may say that you say, I agree with that 100%. Then there's other things that you may hear that you say, I don't know if I agree with that. And then there's another category that you may say that I don't agree with that at all. And the reality is that sometimes when there's one word that's mentioned, sometimes there's many interpretations. As many people as there are in the hall or many people listening, there's that many interpretations. So for example, if I say unity, ittihad, for example, what does that mean? To everyone here will have a different understanding. Some people will mean, yes, we have to have unity. Some people say, hold on, define it for me. What do you mean unity? Does that mean compromise? Hold on a second, I don't know if I agree with that. And so different types of things need an explanation. Similarly, on this journey, there's some tools that we need to understand. And there are going to be people who, as you know, there's at least 3 categories of people in society. One category are those who make things happen, right? Second category are those who watch things happen. And the third category are those who wonder what happened. And the reality of the matter is you want to make sure that you're not in the last category. The first 2 we can deal with, but preferably the first one, if not the second. But please try to stay away from the last category. And so similarly, some of you will hear what I'm saying and some will think, you know, where has this been my whole life? These types of lectures, I wish I heard them 20 years ago. Sometimes you're a parent, and I've heard this from many parents. I wish I had my son or my daughter had heard these majalis 20 years ago so they would still be around in the programs. Or for example, people will say, I wish I heard these majalis when I was a youth, I would still be around in the masjid or the Imam Barga or the community. And this comes to one of the harsh realities that we need to be honest about understanding what are the problems that we're solving and what are the elements that we are addressing, right? And this is important to know. You have to know the lay of your land. So let's go on a journey. The Quran tells us about an individual by the name of Luqman. Luqman al-Hakim. There's a chapter of the Quran, Surah Luqman. Luqman was someone who Allah had given wisdom. So in the stories of Luqman, there are many stories which are very useful and insightful. So Luqman goes on this journey. Now for you and I, someone's going to say, Maulana, Sayyid, Doctor, more English please. Someone's going to say more Urdu, please. Someone's going to say more mirch masala, please. Someone's going to say more mild, please. And on this journey, it's insightful to understand what does the Quran teach us and what are the lessons of the Ahlul Bayt teach us and the awliya of Allah. So Luqman says, I want to teach my son this journey. So he says, how can I teach my son? You know, sometimes we lecture our children, for example, if we want to raise them. Well, Islam says that's not the only way necessarily on how you teach. So Luqman said, he wanted to teach his son something that would stay with him. So they said, my son, let's go and embark on a journey. So they embarked on a journey. Journey is Luqman, his son, and they're going to the water source. And they're going through the desert. And when they're going through the desert, there's Luqman, his son, and a mule that they have with them. You know, like a donkey or something like that. And so in that junction, at the beginning of the journey, Luqman says to his son, he says, my son, I want it to be the case that you sit on the mule, right? And I will walk and I will stand. And we'll go on this journey. So eventually, they proceed on this journey. And when they proceed on this journey, the son is on the mule the father is walking, and eventually when they pass by a town, when they're on their journey, they pass by a town, and the people of the town, they look and they see the scene of these travelers traveling, and they begin to talk. And when they begin to talk, they say, Ajkal na bacha, kids these days, what kind of kid is this? He's like, he's sitting on the mule comfortably while his dad is walking in the heat. What kind of kids are these? Luqman hears, he doesn't say anything to them. He says, my son, did you hear them? He said, yes, Baba, I heard them. Very good. So let's switch. Switch? Let's switch. So Luqman sits on the mule and his son gets down. And so they continue on their journey. So let's continue on our journey. They continue on their journey. When they continue on their journey, they pass by another town, a new town, new people they've never seen before. And the people look and they begin to talk. What a zalim father. He's sitting on the mule comfortably, and his son is walking in the desert. It's like Fir'aun, Namrud, Shaddad, Haman, Qarun. Luqman says, my son, did you hear them? Say, yes, Baba, I heard them. I'll get down too. Walk on our own. They continue on their journey. They pass a third town. And as you can tell, the third town's people begin to say something. They begin to talk. And when they begin to talk, they said, how silly are this father and son? How foolish are they? They have a perfectly good mule. Like imagine, you have a perfectly good car. You have a nice car. It's running perfectly fine. And you're not using it. And you're walking next to it. He said, they have a perfectly good mule. Their father and son are walking. These are fools. Luqman says, my son, did you hear them? He said, yes, Baba, I heard them. He said, let's continue. He said, let's do one more thing. He said, what is it, Baba? Let's both sit on the mule. He said, they both sat on the mule. When they both sat on the mule, eventually they proceeded and they passed the fourth town. When they passed the fourth town, eventually, on their journey, the people of the town, mashallah, people don't, they had nothing to do, better to do. They started doing gossip. And when they started gossiping, they said, what a zalimeen, father and son, mashallah. They have no concept of animal rights. They have no concept of this is also makhluk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Astaghfirullah rabbi wa atubu ilayh. Luqman says, my son, did you hear them? He said, yes, Baba, I heard them. He said, okay, the river where we're trying to get to is there. Let's go, let's get down. He said, my son, what did you notice about this journey we went on? He said, Baba, I noticed that first time I'm on the mule, people are saying something. They're saying something about you, or they're saying something about me, about being zalim and inconsiderate. Then we go further, then we swap, and then they're saying, you're a zalim because you're sitting on the mule and I'm walking. Then we go further, and eventually we're both off the mule, and eventually people say, how foolish are we? And then we sit on the mule, and then people say, we're zalimeen. And eventually this is something that was going on. He said, what did you learn from this? Luqman says. He said, I don't know, Baba, you tell me. He said, I wanted you to understand that no matter how hard you try, you can never make the people happy. So dedicate your life to one thing, making Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala happy. That's it. Because that's the only thing that matters. Insan will leave you in a place where insan, today they're with you, tomorrow they're not with you. I remember Imran Khan, the cricketer, if you whether it's politics aside, he said one time he was coming into Lahore Stadium, and he was a very good cricketer. And he said, they're cheering Lion of Lahore. They're saying this guy's going to bring us victory. And he said, he got to bat in cricket. You guys play cricket here, right? And so cricket's becoming a big sport globally. They figured out the T20 format. Some places have T10 formats. Apparently after soccer, the most watched sport in the world is cricket, believe it or not, by numbers. If you look at, for example, the Super Bowl in America, they say 30, 40 million people watch it. India, Pakistan cricket, you have over 100 million people watching. There's a lot of eyeballs on that, a lot of people watching. So anyways, he said, I went there, people are cheering. And he said he gets the first ball, he gets out. He said he went back the same path, and those same people who were cheering, they were all giving him the things you can't say from the mimbar. And so at one time, as Imam Ali alayhi salam says, Al-yawm yawman, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Al-yawm yawman, there's only 2 days. There's 2 days. One is for you and one is against you. And neither of them last. So when the day is for you, don't get arrogant. Don't get prideful. And when the day is against you, don't get disappointed and disheartened. It won't last. So the principle is that the winds turn. So understanding this, in this context of our understanding, you may say, Subhanallah, Maulana comes on the mimbar and gives a lecture, and when he speaks, you're like, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, MashaAllah. And your same kid sitting next to you is like, La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. What is this? He's like, what, or her is saying, Maulana doesn't understand my life. This is my story, by the way, and my generation's story. That many times the problem that was being solved was for a different era and a different time. Allow me to explain. If you go to a place like Pakistan, for example, or a place like Iran, for example, or a place like Iraq, for example, in the practicing community, for example, notice the topics, notice the discussions, and notice the issues that are coming to the forefront. So, for example, in a place like Pakistan, where the it's predominantly Muslim from the community perspective, is there a debate on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? In the practicing community, not necessarily, no. People say, I already accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is there a debate on Rasulullah? Even if people don't believe in Rasulullah because of, Tawheen al-Rizalat rules, they'll say, I believe in Rasulullah no matter what. So Rasulullah, there's no debate on Rasulullah either. So then issues come up, who's a Khalifa afterwards? And these become debate issues, for example, right? If you go to Iran, what's the situation? In the practicing community, right, of the faith community, you may find that, by the way, I've lectured extensively in the Iranian community and Iraqi community and others, and sometimes the Quran and Allah says, "Qul siru fil ard," go and travel in the land. And when you go and travel in the land, you see reality, and the reality may be very different than what you think. And so, there's a reason I would say that, but I'm not going to mention it here. Anyways, now coming to this, in Iran, in the practicing community, you may find people who believe in, for example, is there a debate on Allah? Perhaps not. Is there a debate on Rasulullah? Perhaps not. Is there even a debate on Imam Ali alayhi salam? Perhaps not today, maybe in some time before the Safavid dynasty, 400 years ago or so. So maybe issues like this marja, that marja, my marja is this, maybe these issues arise, for example. In America, in Canada, what's the issue? Do people walking down the street, do they know Imam Ali? If you randomly pick somebody on the corner of the street, it's more diverse here. But in America, for sure not. If you ask a random person off the street, do you know Muhammad? He said, I've heard the name. I don't know much about him. God. In this society, you have to start from scratch. You have to first lay the foundation of Allah, Tawheed, and the basis of it. And you need to not be antagonistic towards questions, against questions. We need to be open to questions. Because you can't hide a question. The most dangerous question is the unasked question. Because what ends up happening is that festers inside the heart, and it doesn't find a solution, and eventually what happens is people disconnect. So some people will say certain things. It's important for us to notice this. We need to make sure that the systems that govern our mimbar are conducive to the truth being spoken. And that's not always the case. You have to know the game of incentives. You have to know how incentives work. And if you understand how incentives work, you have to put pieces of the equation together. Allow me to explain. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When the British came to India a couple centuries ago, Imam Ali alayhi salam, before we get there, he says, learn from history. In his wasiyah, in his will, he said, learn from history. Tariq. And he says, my son, it's addressed to Muhammad Hanafiya, regardless of who it's addressed to. Amir al-Mu'mineen says, study from history. And he says a line, which I want us to really reflect on. He says, study from history. He says, I studied, Amir al-Mu'mineen saying, I studied the pages of history up until the point it was as if I was walking amongst the ruins of past civilizations. And I saw what brought them good and what brought them harm. Why is Imam Ali saying this? I went to the British Museum, in London. They had all these stolen artifacts there, mashallah. And it was like from all over the world. And you're like, wow, this is amazing. This is phenomenal. And the reality of the matter is, when you see them, you learn lessons. And there's valuable lessons that sometimes people thousands of years ago found out, that we're still finding out now, and still people don't do amal on it. For example, they found in some of the old hieroglyphics in ancient Egypt that over the doctor's office, you know, doctors, physicians, it would say in some of them, some of the hieroglyphics said, a man lives off of 1/3 of what he eats. The doctor lives off the other 2/3. And the reality is, we're finding out today that it's better to reduce how much you eat as opposed to increase it. Or at least make sure that the nutrition that you put in your body is the right type of nutrition. And so coming to this, Imam Ali says, learn from history. So when I study history, I don't study it in any other way other than it is ibadah. In my mind, it's worship. We've made this big dichotomy of what is ilm and what is knowledge and what is Islam and what is not. And we've created this false dilemma. You know false dilemma? I often tell people, teach your children debates. False dilemma is, you're, as an example, you're either with us or against us. Baba, I could be Switzerland. Maybe I'm not with you or against you. Why do I have to pick a side? You know, and the good debaters know that if someone says the only 2 doors you can go through, a good debater says, I can open a 3rd door or a 4th. I don't need to listen to your frame. So you're either with us or against us. False dilemma. Similarly, in our communities, in our societies, we need to understand this notion. We need to understand what's going on in our society. So we've said knowledge is either Islami knowledge or not Islami knowledge. And I'm going to give you a different perspective, and you don't have to accept it. That's the beautiful part. Stay with it. Marinate on it. Think about it. Reject a part of it, accept a part of it. Remember, at least 3 sides to the coin. But there's a tradition that you'll find attributed to the 5th Imam al-Baqir, where he says that ilm and knowledge is not what we've made it. In fact, it's only 2 kinds. Qurbatan ilallah or not. It either takes you to Allah or not. So I'll ask you a question. In Islam, in the early days, when there used to be battles and there used to be POWs, prisoners of war, and they would come on both sides, and the Muslim side, they would come. For example, Rasulullah would say to them, the Prophet would say, Rahmatul lil Alameen, would say to them that you can go free on a couple of conditions. Either number 1, you become Muslim and you become part of the Ummah, or number 2, you do what? Teach. Teach what? Fiqh? Quran? Huh? That person is not even Muslim. Rasulullah understood there was a value in knowledge. And what I'm trying to get at here is, we have created this deen and dunya. Have you heard of this? Deen and dunya, deen and dunya, deen and dunya. Deen, faith, religion. Although religion is not a best translation of deen. We use it, but it's not the best. Why? Because if I translate Maliki Yawmiddin, what's the translation? Huh? Lord of the day of religion? Deen is something else. It's deeper than that. So anyways, deen can have a few meanings, and we need to reflect on that. We need to look at it once again. Anyways, in this context, when we're learning from history, we should learn from these things and understand it as ibadah. And I'm telling you, this is very important. Why? Because I'll give you one example. I was in Los Angeles lecturing, and when I'm in Los Angeles lecturing, over there, in the Majlis, there were people who were coming who worked at NASA. You know NASA? I don't know what's the equivalent in Canada of NASA. What do you guys have here? No? Nothing? Okay. Yeah. We don't mind our own business in America. You guys mind your own business, which is quite good, I guess, in some sense. We make everyone else's business our business. Anyways, so in this situation, these NASA people, these people were coming. They were astrophysicists. They're jet propulsion experts. And this is a branch of what people call rocket science. You heard of rocket science? It's not rocket science. So I ask you a question. If you're a rocket scientist in the day, from morning to evening, when you come to the Imam Barga, the Husainiya, does that part of your brain shut off? It's like a light switch on and off? I don't know, you tell me. But the reality is, we're encouraging our next generation to become very educated, which is beautiful and phenomenal. But sometimes, we don't consider second-order consequences. If you've studied the financial markets, it's very important to know what second-order consequences are. So allow me to explain. Because no one should say history, I have not mentioned anything in the last few nights that is not Quran. And if you're wondering where's the Quran, I'm wondering how much of the Quran do you know? So the same way that, communities have a rating system for Maulanas, it's a A Maulana, B Maulana, C Maulana. Believe it or not, Maulanas also have rating systems for communities. And you don't want to know the ratings sometimes. They're pretty rough. Anyways, having said that, the story is the British Raj. During the British Raj, when the British came to India, the story goes that they built up their base in Delhi. You know Delhi? They set their capital up in Delhi. When they set up their capital in Delhi, it said that they had a problem which they had never dealt with before. And the problem that they had never dealt with before was they had to deal with snakes, cobras, cobra snakes. They're like, we haven't dealt with cobra snakes. What do we do? So they figured out a plan and they said, look, you know what we're going to do? We're going to give a bounty for every dead cobra someone brings us. So the locals, they know how to deal with the cobras. They've been dealing with them for centuries. We're new. We don't know how to. So you know what do we have? We have money, so we'll pay them. So, and they'll solve our problem. So they will bring and the snakes to us and the cobras, and we'll pay them a certain amount, or rupee or two, whatever it was at that time, and it will solve the problem. So they implement. They say from tomorrow, bounty system in place. For every dead cobra you bring us, we'll give you money. And this is our proposition. And so eventually what happened was, as they're tracking, the news spread, and eventually dead cobras, dead snakes are coming, and they're paying this amount, and they're paying. And they're also tracking the data. So 1 week passes, 2 weeks pass, 3 weeks pass, 1 month pass, 2 months pass. Eventually what happens is, they notice that initially it seems that the number of cobras is declining. It's good. But then eventually it starts stabilizing. And after some more time, eventually, the number of cobras in Delhi begins to increase. So what? We're paying all of this money, and the cobras were supposed to be gone by now. Not only are they not gone, they seem to be increasing. There's more. We're paying out more and more money in cobra, money, in bounties. What's the problem? So they launched an investigation. And when they launched an investigation, they found something interesting. That they were dealing with a new breed that they had never dealt with before, which was Indians. And when Indians figured out the bounty system, they said, you know what, this is a very good profit opportunity. And they started doing cobra farming. Now, whether they were from Gujarat or not, I don't know. Don't ask me that. Possible, but I don't know. So they said, we can make a lot of money off of these guys if we start farming the cobras. So they started farming the cobras, and they had large cobra farms. And that's why the British said, we're now paying so much money because we're being taken for a ride. So then they got upset. And when they got upset, they said, from tomorrow, no more bounty system. We're not paying a dime. We're not paying a rupee. We're not paying a paisa. And then the Indian businessmen said, oh, really? Okay. We have something for you then. So they went to their cobra farms and they released all of the cobras into the city. So what was their desired result was they wanted to get rid of the cobras, the British. In reality, what ended up happening is they ended up with 3 times more cobras than they started with. Incentive systems, second order thinking. What is the consequence of the first consequence? At that level, when you start thinking about this and knowing about these things, it will change your perception of things. So what happened in our communities? I grew up in a generation where the narrative was, Majlis should only be, for example, in Urdu. Niyat was good oftentimes. You'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Islam bhi aa jayega, Urdu bhi aa jayegi. MashaAllah. When time forwarded, there's that old saying, na idhar ke rahe na udhar ke. Neither here nor there. And the reality was, I saw a whole generation in front of me that lost both. They didn't get Urdu, nor did they get Islam. Number 1. Number 2, you have to fix the systems that govern our society to get to Kamal, to get to Ihsan. I'll give you an example. If you read the history of Europe, you'll find that the first universities in Europe, they were established by the church. Oxford University, for example, in the 1200s. Before that, actually, some of the longest running institutions of higher education in the world are, for example, the Qarawiyun in Fez, for example, in Morocco, and the House of Najaf is another example. And you'll find other examples of this. But in the European world, Oxford and these are considered some of the earliest ones. And eventually, the church was running these institutions. And when the church was running these institutions, they then eventually told the scientists that we want you to do research. They told the likes of Copernicus and Galileo and those researchers, we want you to do research. And these professors were not so dull, huh? They knew a thing or two. So they said, hold on a second. You want us to do research? Yes. You want us to publish our research? Yes. Okay. You're paying our salary? Yes. You control the political power as well? Yes. Okay. You have a worldview based on the Bible? Yes. What if my research contradicts your worldview? What do you mean? What if I do research and I find out that you believe in a geocentric model of the universe and I know it's heliocentric? You believe, as per your interpretation of the Bible, that the earth is the center of the universe. But my research says otherwise. My research would say that the center of the earth, of the universe, is not the earth, it's actually the sun. What do? This is what's called a conflict of interest. And eventually the church said, because the church also did the Inquisition, right? They killed many scientists and stuff of that nature. But eventually the church said, you got a point. You got a point. So then they implemented a system called tenure. Have you heard of tenure? T-E-N-U-R-E. Professors in universities, for example, in other positions sometimes, they get that much experience and that much position that eventually it becomes very difficult to fire them. It becomes very difficult to relieve them of their position. That is, eventually it's a safety net that if your research contradicts our worldview, you can still publish your research without fear of the consequences because you have a safety net that will protect you. So now I'm going to ask you a question. What is the tenure system for the mimbar? I'll wait. Is there a tenure system? Or is there a anti-tenure system? Allow me to explain. Let's say you go to your doctor, you have a really massive headache. And you go to your doctor and you want it to be the case, there's two scenarios. One scenario is you want it to be the case that you just have a headache and you just need some Tylenol, Advil, acetaminophen, whatever it is, ibuprofen or whatever you guys use. You need to take that and you solve the problem. But the doctor looks at your x-ray scans and the doctor realizes, hold on a second, buddy, I see a tumor here. We got to operate. What does the doctor say to you? The doctor says, he could say, just take 2 Tylenols, solve the problem, you'll be good. That'll be unethical, of course, right? You get in trouble. I don't know about here, but you get a massive lawsuit in the US, right? In America, you get destroyed for that. Number one. Number two, or you tell them the truth. And you say, look, we have to operate. And the chances of survival may not be that promising. But this is the reality. I'm not going to sugarcoat this for you. I can't. And the reality is, we don't have safe spaces from our member to say what wants to be said or needs to be said. And the reality is, it's conformity. Get with the program or get out. And what happens in conformity is, you don't get the truth always. I give you what you want to hear. I give you, take 2 Advils. I say, just get some sleep. When in reality, there's a deeper thing that's needed. And that's a problem, that's a challenge. Because there's many things that when I read Islam from the books of Islam, I found a very different picture than what I found listening from the mimbar. And by the way, I'm not blaming Ahlul Mimbar. I'm not blaming the ulama. They are prisoners to the system that you've created. They are prisoners to the system that I've created. They're prisoners to finishing before namaz time and leaving time for Noha. They're prisoners to all of the systems that govern society. They're prisoners to, I didn't hear this for 40 years and listening to Majlis. Where did you bring this? Baba, I said there's 3 categories of knowledge. Just because you haven't heard something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And just because it's something that's it doesn't mean it's true. Have you heard of something called ghalatul amma? Commonly accepted wrong practice. I'll give you an example. Have you ever heard of TED? TED Talks? What does TED stand for? What is it? Nobody knows? Technology, education, design. Look this up. It actually stands for Technology Entertainment Design. Thank you for participating though. And the idea is, most people, even if you tell them it's entertainment, they would say, no, 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 it can't be. And similarly, there's many things that you may hear on the mimbar from time to time. And by the way, I'm not saying that it's wrong. What I'm saying is there may be another picture that is needed to be discovered and discussed so that I don't lose a generation. So I don't lose people. I was lecturing in one community. A sister came to me. She was a mother. And she said, I'm going to leave Islam. I said, what happened? She said, I don't understand how it's possible that a girl can become, she has 2 daughters, she says, I don't understand how it's possible that a girl can become baligh at 9. This person's about to leave Islam. What do you say to that person? Let me just explain a few things. How does the faqih come to a conclusion? You have to know methodology. Methodology is, they look at riwayat. So in this case, you know, it's very well known, you should know, in the Hawza circles, we have a narration during the time of the Prophet, 9. But then we have a narration during the time of the 6th Imam that says that it's not 9 anymore, it's 13. You may not have heard that from the mimbar, because people have fear on the mimbar that if they tell you, then you're going to be like, you know, X, Y, and Z. Third element is then there's a riwayah during the 8th Imam's time, after the 6th Imam, that says 9 again. So some ulama do ihtiyat, they say I have 2 precautionary ones, safer than the other one. Other ulama say no, there are scholars alive today who say the age of wajib baligh for a girl is 13. There are ulama like this in our school of thought. And I'm telling you this why? Because if that person is going to leave and they didn't hear this perspective of Islam, maybe they haven't understood the Islam in the true sense. By the way, we know, if you were following the studies in COVID, the age of at least puberty, it shifts based on many factors. And so you need to understand that for that, when stress was more induced, it was shifting in America at least. And so these are conversations that need to happen between the Hawza and our institutions to bring, not for people to cause rift, but to understand what is reality so we can cater to a new generation. Otherwise, people will say, Mama, Baba, the same thing I told you on the first night, that we're losing people. Now when it comes to this, we need to understand how do we get to this point, which brings me to the point of Kamal and Ihsan that I really need to explain, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Allahumma salli. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, why did He create us? Why did He create you? What's the reason? Allah in different places tells us about the nahl in the Quran. He tells us about the bee. Allah tells us, for example, about, the ants. Allah tells us about all of these other creations that He's made. The heavens, the earth, the planets, the moons, the mountains, all of these things. But eventually there's a moment where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He talks about embryology in the Quran. And He talks about for example, the cell, the zygote, and it splits, and eventually layers come, and bones, flesh, all of these things emerge. And eventually, when Allah describes the creation of you and I as insan, and eventually He says a line. By the way, when this statement and the dynamics of embryology were explained in the Quran, certain people, such as Dr. Maurice Bucaille, the French physician, he became Muslim. He said that, look, it wasn't possible. People at that time didn't know these stages of embryology. And so he was moved. I'm not saying that you accept it. I'm just giving a perspective. So now, eventually, when Allah says all of this about the human being coming into physical creation, then Allah says a line. فَتَبَارَكَ اللَّهُ أَحْسَنَ الْخَالِقِينَ. Glory be to the ahsan of khaliqeen. Ahsan and ahsan, it comes from husn. The ha, that is husn, is beauty, virtue, righteousness. In fact, in another way, it's excellence or most excellence, the best. Allah did not say this when He created other creations, although Allah is Allah. But when He created you and I, He said, this is my best of creations. This is ihsan, number 1. Number 2, kamal. What is kamal? And what does it have to do with us? 2 words you need to understand. Ayatollah Mutahari talks about this in his books. You can expand and read on it. But he says something interesting. And he says there's 2 words you need to know. There's tamam and there's kamal. There's takmil and there's ikmal. What is that ayah of the Quran? Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinukum wa atmamtu alaykum ni'mati wa raditu lakum al-islama dina. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in the verse that is very famous that we mentioned for Ghadir, right? Al-yawma akmaltu lakum dinukum. This day we have perfected for you your religion, your deen. اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي, and completed upon you our favors. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says اليوم أكملت لكم دينكم وأتممت عليكم نعمتي. What's the difference? Tamam, Shaykh Mutahari says is, look, tamam is if I have a building, if I have 4 walls, a roof and the ground, it's complete as a room. The room is complete. Or for example, the building, if I put 4 walls, a roof and the sides, for example, it's complete. But is it perfected? Is it excellence? Excellence is not yet. As in, excellence and perfection will come in when I work on the architecture, when I work on the beautification, when I look at the philosophy behind it. If any of you study architect, my grandfather was an architect, there's a philosophy behind construction. And one of the big questions of our modern world is, when we want to see a beautiful city or a beautiful town, why do we go to 200 to 300 or older cities? Why do we go to Paris? Why do we go to Rome? Why do we go to old cities that are there? Today, in our modern world, we don't seem to be making beautiful cities or ihsan of cities because the basis has become commercial. Why am I saying this to you and why is this important? Is we have to understand the methodology that this has to do with. So now, when these 2 terms are in front of you, tamam and kamal, Allah, as a human being, as an insan, you and I, if we are walking, breathing, all of these physical things, we may be complete, but we're not perfected. And when it comes to perfection, Allah sent us on this journey. Why did Allah create you and I? Allah created you and I to worship Him. Sure, as the Quran says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I created you so that you worship. I did not create the jinn and insan except for worship. But what does Allah get out of our worship? Nothing. And the idea is that worship, that ibadah, is supposed to cause an inspiration and a revolution in you as an individual, as a human being, towards kamal, going towards perfection. So now comes understanding, why am I here? One of the things that you and I are supposed to do is understand this dichotomy. I'm coming back to what I mentioned earlier. Deen, dunya, false dilemma that I mentioned earlier. Now I'm tying all of these things together. Deen, dunya, akhirah. There's 3 terms you need to know. Deen, dunya, akhirah. We have made a false dilemma between deen and dunya. There's deen, religion, and this world. And they seem to be at odds. Whereas in the Islamic model, there's only 2 terms. There's deen, there's dunya, akhirah. In the context of places of zaman and makan and time and space, there are only 2. There's dunya and akhirah. Deen is the bridge that gets me from dunya to akhirah. Oh. Deen is the bridge that gets me from dunya to akhirah. So now when I understand this, you don't think of deen and dunya at odds anymore. You and I think of deen and dunya at odds because we haven't understood it in the Islamic framework. When Ibn Sina was coming up with philosophy, Ibn Sina was he was an Ismaili Shia. Some say he became Isnashari later, but they say he was one of the greatest minds the Muslim world produced. And he wrote Al-Qanun fi Tib. Up until about 400 years ago to 300 years ago, it was used as the main medical textbook in the universities in the West, in Europe. Al-Qanun fi Tib. And he also wrote a tafsir of the Quran, by the way. So these people were not seeing science and investigation and enlightenment as at odds with religion. No. They were saying Allah's the one who created the atom. Allah's the one who created this universe. So when Allah said in the Quran, there were ayat of the Quran that were inspiring people to do research. For example, what? For example, when Allah says, "Sanurihim ayatina fil afaq wa fi anfusihim," we have made for them signs in the horizons and within themselves, macro and micro. What do you see when you see your hand? What do you see when you see creation? Do you see anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or not? And one of those aspects are very important. So now, as insan, Allah says, you are my best of creation. But there's a constant journey and a struggle to try to go higher. So now come on with me on this journey. Ibrahim alayhi salam. Ibrahim goes through numerous journeys as per the Quran and as per the riwayat. Adam goes through different stories. You know, there's a spiritual progression that happens. Yusuf goes through a spiritual progression. Ibrahim goes through a spiritual progression. Ibrahim, at one level, there's a moment where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests him. Now there's 2 terms you need to know, and this will help tomorrow and the day after, is shar and ibtila. Many people ask, why is all of this going on in injustice in the world? Where is Allah? And I touched on this in Jummah for those of you who are here. But the reality is we need to look at this from a different perspective. And I'm going to elaborate on that. So there's two things, shar and ibtila. Shar is that man-made evil, right? Min shar al-waswasil khannas, right? And then there's something called ibtila. What is ibtila Ibrahima, right? Ibtila is a trial that comes to you to elevate you. And it's possible that one person or one entity's shar is another person's ibtila. For example, Firaun, it was his shar that caused the problems for Musa, and for Musa it's a test to elevate himself. So there's an interplay here. So now, stay with me in this context. What does this have to do with Karbala? What does this have to do with Imam Hussein? What does this have to do with the Quran? I'm telling you exactly what it has to do. Ibrahim is tested at one level where he is a shepherd. One of the things that Allah made all of the prophets, especially the higher ranking ones, He made them shepherds to look after flocks of sheep. And perhaps that's the best leadership development that one can do. Because you have these animals who are going in all different directions. Some are fighting you, some are running away. You have to get them all together and move them in one direction. And that's essentially what the prophets often do with insan eventually. And so in that circumstance, Ibrahim has his flock. Now he's in Babel, for example, in old Mesopotamia, for example, in modern day Iraq and this region. And he's the only person who is a mawahid, only person who believes in one God. And in the middle of this barren desert, he has his flock of sheep, and then he hears, Subuhun Quddus Rabbul Malaikati war Ruh. Ibrahim says, my Lord's name? Here in this barren desert? Wow. He went towards the voice. He saw the voice. He said, oh man, you're the only person I've heard recite the statement of my Lord, the dhikr of my Lord. He said, can you please recite it again? Man says, what will you give me? You know, today things haven't changed much, huh? He said, what will you give me? Ibrahim says, you know my sheep? I'll give you 1/3 of them. Pretty good deal. Sheep at that time is your property. That's your net worth. That's all of your assets. He said, I'll give you 1/3. He says, deal. Subuhun Quddus Rabbul Malaikati war Ruh. Ibrahim's in another world spiritually. He said, one more time, Ibrahim says, one more time. So what will you give me? So I'll give you another 1/3. I'll give you half of what's left. Okay, deal. Subuhun Quddus Rabbul Malaikati war Ruh. One more time. What will you give me? So whatever I have left, it's all yours. Subuhun Quddus Rabbul Malaikati war Ruh. Ibrahim is in another world. At that point, the man responds, congratulations Ibrahim, you passed your test. There was an angel sent from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to test you in the domain of your wealth. Does your wealth control you or do you control your wealth? And you completely passed this test, number one. So the test of his wealth. When it comes to this, eventually there comes a moment in time where the same individual, Ibrahim, goes to another stage. He's climbing the stages of spirituality. And eventually there's a moment where Namrud, and in that situation, he goes and he destroys the idol of the people when they go out of the town. And he leaves the axe that he breaks the other idols around the neck of the largest idol. And when he leaves it around the neck of the largest idol, eventually the people come back from the town and they say, who broke this idol? And Ibrahim says, ask the big one if he can answer to you. He's trying to wake the people up. By the way, sometimes, you know, before kufr fatwas, even prophets did things to wake people up. If you read the Quran, there's a moment where Ibrahim was trying to wake his people up and he says, this kawkab, he sees a star in the sky because they were believing they were worshipping the stars and things. He says, Hada Rabbi, this is my Rabb, my Lord. Ibrahim. You know, have you heard of becoming holier than the Pope? Right? Or holier than thou? So people, if you and I were there, we'd be like, Ibrahim, you know that's not this. Hold on a second. He said, then he noticed that the star was declining. As the star began to decline, he said, this cannot be my Lord. It's gone invisible. It's gone away. My Lord cannot go away. And so he was trying to wake the people up. Similarly, in this environment, he was trying to wake them up about the idols. Eventually, they got very upset. And they said, Ibrahim, of course, you know that we cannot solve these problems. These idols cannot speak. So eventually, they said, we need to get rid of Ibrahim. When they said they will get rid of Ibrahim, Ibrahim had discussions with Namrud. And Namrud, one of the principles of the Quran is the agents of Allah. Ibrahim, for example, they tried to use logic with the enemies of Allah, so to speak, up to the maximum capacity. And if that doesn't work, eventually, the enemies, or the people who are the opposition, I should say, they become people who are barbarians. As an example, you'll find that Ibrahim, when he's standing in front of Namrud or Nimrod, he says, Namrud says to him, "Who's your Lord?" He said, "My Lord is the one who gives life and death." Now Namrud, a lot of these rulers and politicians are very cunning in some ways, right? So he says, "Look, I also give life and death." Namrud says, "I also give life and death." So you give life and death? How? He said, "Look, so my court, you see those two people right here?" He said, "That person, he's on death row. I'm going to say that he's going to be set free." He goes, "a free man." And the one next to him, he's a free man. I'm saying, let's put him on death row. So I just sentence one to freedom and I sentence the other one to death. Now Ibrahim's like, how do I get through to this guy? He said, "Okay, my Lord is the one who brings the sun out from the east and sets it in the west. You bring it out from the west, set it in the east." At that point, Namrud realized he couldn't do it. And then he said, "We need to get rid of him." And so then he said, "Build a fire." A massive fire that they built. When they built this massive fire, eventually what happens? Then they make a catapult and they throw Ibrahim towards the fire. And eventually, Ibrahim is going towards the fire, and when he's being thrown towards the fire, eventually Jibreel comes and says, "Ibrahim, do you need my assistance? Do you need my help?" He says, by the way, some things are for the Prophet, some things are for us. You and I, Jibreel comes to help you, take the help. Ibrahim's a different story. Ibrahim is on a different spiritual game. He's saying that, yes, Jibreel, I need assistance, but not from you. I need assistance from Rabbul Alameen. So eventually, Allah says, "Ya naru kuni bardan wa salamun ala Ibrahim." O fire, become light and easy on Ibrahim. He passed his second test, which is a test of his own life. He's going to higher stations spiritually. Then comes the third test, which is one of the most difficult tests, where now it's not only him, now he's having to sacrifice his offspring. So what's the discussion that the Quran highlights? "Inni ara fil manami anni asbuk fanzur madha tara." Said, "My son, I'm seeing that in my dream I'm sacrificing you. What is your will? What is your decree? What do you want? What is your view on this?" Now this is a test for Ibrahim, but it's also a test for Ismail. And then Ismail responds, "Ya aba tifal ma tu'mar, satajiduni insha'Allah min as-sabirin." My father, do as you have been commanded. Inshallah, you'll find us amongst the peaceful one. Again, this is test for Ismail and Ibrahim. You and I see a dream like this, don't act on it. The son sees it, this is it. "Dad, you lost it. Dad, we got to take you to the psych ward." And Ibrahim's game is different. Anyways, at that junction, when this happens, eventually, Allah replaces this sacrifice of Ismail with a ram, as you know. And this is accepted by Judaism, Christianity, Islam. It's common amongst the Abrahamic faiths. So when it's common amongst the Abrahamic faiths, eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala called this dhibh azim, which was replaced, for example, right? And not even Shia scholars, even scholars from the general Muslim community, such as Farman Ali and others, they said that it cannot be that this is, by the way, we may have both. There's a zahir and a batin. One is we accept the ram, and we also accept that that's not the full spiritual, maybe, interpretation. So Farman Ali and others have said that it cannot be that Allah ransomed and exchanged the ransom of Ismail, a prophet who is the son of an Ulul Azam prophet, who's a prophet himself, with a simple ram. Even though the narrations say that this ram was in Jannah in 40 years and all of that, that maybe you may find. He said it had to be something else. And he says this was none other than the sacrifice of Hussein ibn Ali on the plains of Karbala that Allah replaced it with. Because the Quran said, وَتَرَكْنَاهُمْ فِي الْآخِرِينَ. We postponed this to a later date. And that's why perhaps when Rasulullah gave this test, it was the ultimate test. Why do I say this? There's a lot to say, I'm leaving it, but we'll pick up tomorrow, inshallah, life permitting. Rasulullah said, nobody's been tested like I've been tested. In the Judaic faith, in Judaism, they have a discussion amongst the Jewish scholars that God tested Abraham or Ibrahim with his son. But there's possibly one layer deeper that if God had tested him in this way, we don't know what would happen. How would he deal with it? And that was if God tested Ibrahim with not his son, but his grandson. And that's the test that Allah gave Rasulullah, where he had to sacrifice his son, his grandson Hussein ibn Ali, which becomes a higher test. And another aspect of the test and the tragedy of Abu Abdullah is people give tests in their wealth. They give tests in their life. They sometimes give tests of their children, their offspring. The Quran says very clearly about this. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُم مُّصِيبَةٌ قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, most surely you will be tested. وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ, with fear, وَالْجُوعِ, hunger, وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ, and loss of wealth, وَالْأَنفُسِ, and your own self, وَالثَّمَرَاتِ, and your fruits. Some say this is your children or whatever is valuable to you. So you're going to be tested. I'm going to be tested. We're going to be tested. But perhaps no one has been tested with all the dimensions of wealth or their life or their family's life in one moment and one time, in one zaman and one makan, as Sayyid al-Shuhada was. Even Ibrahim's tests were not all at the same time. And Imam Hussein teaches us in that dynamic how to elevate ourselves and have patience and resilience in the face of the most difficulty. I'm leaving everything here, but remember and know this because it will help you in the future. Why do we discuss Rasulullah? Why do we discuss Islam? Why do we discuss his personalities? Because they are pivotal to our understanding of the deen. I have not seen Sirat. I have not seen Jahannam. I have not seen Jannah. I have not seen any of the things that are in ghaib. Rasulullah said it, therefore I accept it. Number one. Number two, in the ihkam of Islam, you will find in the early days, what were the ayat that are Makki based on? What are the Madani ayat based on? 13 years in Makkah, roughly 10 years in Medina. In that era, what's going on? In this environment between Makkah and Medina, are the chapters of the Makki chapters and verses, are they telling people do namaz, roza, hajj, zakat, khums, amr bil ma'ruf? No. They're saying one thing, La ilaha, qulu la ilaha illallah tuflihu. Say there's one God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. By the way, Allah is a contraction of al-ilah. Al meaning the, ilah, deity. The Arabs, pagans before Islam, they already believed in Allah. He was the high God. They said, Muhammad, you want another God? No problem. We have 365, add one, no problem. But don't say that there's no God except that God. And so that was the problem that they were facing. So now in this dynamic, Rasulullah is in that environment. All of the early part of Islam is focused on belief. And then what are the ahkam? Ahkam are important. Please don't misunderstand what I'm saying. मैं जो कह रहा हूँ मैं उसका जिम्मेदार हूँ, जो आप समझ रहे हैं उसके जिम्मेदार. So keep that in mind. So now when this comes up, in this dynamic, when Rasulullah is in this environment, in the first part of Makkah, there's no ahkam. There's only one thing. Say la ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and there's namaz, salah. Salah, but not salah like you and I right now, huh? Salah, 2 units in the morning, 2 units in the evening. That's it. Seemed like a good deal. Anyways, from the material realm. Then they got to Medina. And in Medina, still 18 months, no new ahkam, nothing. 18 months later, after they migrate to Medina, what are the ayat that come? 2 verses come from the Quran. Does anyone know? First ayah. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. Ahsan. Fasting. Oh, you who believe, fasting has been prescribed on you as it was prescribed on those who came before you. So that you may. لعلكم. That's an amazing thing. Allah didn't say that you will achieve taqwa. Maybe, perhaps you'll achieve taqwa. Many people, they don't get taqwa. Many people just get hunger, and many people gain weight. Many people don't get that because taqwa is much deeper, the essence of it. Anyways, but then there's another verse that came alongside. Does anyone know what that verse was? Inna Allah wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi wa sallimu taslima. Allah is saying, who's saying this? Allah is saying, Allah and His angels, Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna, send salutations, send salawat. On who? Inna Allaha wa malaikatahu yusalluna ala nabi. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu sallu alayhi. Allah is saying that, oh, you who believe, you also send salawat. Allah is la sharik. Huh? And the one thing that Allah is saying that I do and the angels do with me, and that I want you to do, is send salawat on Rasulullah. Why? So when we talk about Rasulullah and we talk about the Ahlul Bayt, we need to realign our compass, because sometimes we misunderstand the position of Rasulullah. We don't understand how pivotal he is to the religion. Because Allah is sanctifying and holding his position at the highest level. And that's something that we need to really reconcile and understand. हुर की लहद जो रोज़ा सरवर के साथ है, कहता है वो कि बहिश्त मेरे घर के साथ है, और कोई नहीं अब के जो खंजर के साथ है, कोई नहीं अब के जो खंजर के साथ है, जिसको भी देखिए वो कटे सर के साथ है, जिसको भी देखिए वो कटे सर के साथ है, और उन पर दुरूद पढ़ने वालों में हम भी हैं, उन पर दुरूद पढ़ने वालों में हम भी हैं, अपना भी नाम खालिक अकबर के साथ है. That is, when it comes to reciting the salawat on Rasulullah, this is the one thing that insan and Allah are in the same dimension. Of course, Allah is Allah, no doubt. Please don't misunderstand. What I'm saying is, when we say this, it's important to understand this. So now, if you're with me up to here, I'm ending now. The connection between the movement of all of the prophets and the movement of Imam Hussein is not separated. When Hussein is following on the acts of Ibrahim, on the acts of Rasulullah, we need to understand that spiritual elevation and kamal that he's pursuing in the spiritual realm and this realm beyond, that has to do with the dynamics of understanding what was Ibrahim's movement and what was the movement of Hussein, which I'm concluding with this lines of poetry. The same poet, Zain Jafri from Karachi, beautiful lines of poetry, where he says about the dynamics of understanding the connection between the movement of the prophets and Imam Hussein alayhi salam. Sometimes when we think about Imam Hussein alayhi salam, we think that's devoid. When Rasulullah said, Husseinu minni wa ana min al-Hussein, he's not exaggerating. Rasulullah doesn't exaggerate. He's saying this for a reason. He's saying, you want to understand Islam and the essence of Islam, you need to understand what's going on here. And so the poet says, how does the relationship between the prophets and the Imams connect? तीरों का सामना है और मुस्कुरा रहे हैं. In honor of the 6-month-old of Imam Hussein. तीरों का सामना है और मुस्कुरा रहे हैं, किस खानदान से हैं असगर बता रहे हैं, किस खानदान से हैं असगर बता रहे हैं, और काबा बना रहे थे बेटा लिए इब्राहिम, काबा बना रहे थे बेटा लिए इब्राहिम, बाबा के साथ असगर काबा बचा रहे हैं. Is the poet here saying that Ibrahim and his son were building the Kaaba, were they not? Hussein and Asghar, his son, are protecting the Kaaba. The Kaaba would have no one to go towards it, to circumambulate it in the truest sense without Hussein ibn Ali. So that's why when we talk about Kamal and the movement towards progression, Aba Abdullah symbolizes that at the highest level. There's much to say, I'm leaving everything. But this love is something that's a treasure that Allah has given you and I. Don't take it for granted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He gives you a treasure, you need to cherish it. And the dimensions of Karbala, it's what pulls us back. Tomorrow we'll talk about aql and ishq. And it's important for us to understand the domain of these two and how they help us understand our pursuit. Nonetheless, Imam Hussein alayhi salam on the plains of Karbala, he gave loved ones. And after that, the movement didn't end. The tragedy didn't end. It went on to Kufa and Sham. And difficulty after difficulty emerged. And sometimes the difficulty was the 6-month-old child of Aba Abdullah. Sometimes the difficulty was the brother of Aba Abdullah, the moon of Banu Hashim, Qamar Bani Hashim. Sometimes the difficulty was Ali Akbar. But remember, Bibi Zainab teaches us, especially in these ayam of Zainabiyah and Liali and the nights of Zainabiyah, that Allah has given you the ability and I the ability to focus on what is truth. What is the beauty? What is the main focus? So when Zainab salamullah alayha said, Ma ra'aytu illa jamila, I saw nothing but beauty. That line that you say, what did Allah do? And what happened? I said, I saw nothing but beauty. Because you saw the dhulm that you did. And that's what he wanted her to focus on. But she said, maybe she would say, I saw an uncle give everything and go to sleep by the Furat for his niece and the children. I saw a son sacrificed for his father. I saw a nephew say, how do you find death? Ahla min al-asal. I find it sweeter than honey. I saw the best of humanity in sacrifice come out from the plains of Karbala. Who are you to tell me what I'm going to focus on and what I'm going to understand? Ajrukum ala Allah. Amongst those people who gave were those individuals such as the 6-month-old of Aba Abdullah. Azadaro do jumle zahmat tamam. Imam Ali maqam Hussain ibn Ali jab Karbala mein روز عاشور جب انہوں نے اپنے 6 ماہ کے صغیر کو انہوں نے قتل گاہ میں لے آئے اور یہ بچہ یہ 6 ماہہ پیاس سے اتنا متاثر ہوا تھا. اس میدان میں امام علی مقام نے کیا دیکھا وہ منظر آپ کے سامنے ہے. مگر ایک اور منظر ہے کہ جب علی اصغر شہید ہو چکے واپس جب امام آئے خیمہ گاہ کی جانب اور پشت خیمہ پر جب آئے تو امام نے چاہا کہ اپنے 6 مہینے والے علی اصغر کو دفن کریں. امام نے دفن کیا. خدا جانے وہ کیا عالم ہوگا کہ امام نے اپنے بیٹے کو کیسے دفن کیا ہوگا خاک کربلا میں. اور جب امام نے دفن کیا مگر قیامت وہاں ختم نہیں ہوئی, کیونکہ جب روز عاشور ہو چکی, عصر عاشور ہو چکا اور آخر میں جب شام غریباں آئی تو پھر اشقیاء نے صدا دی اور کہا کہ خیمے لوٹ لیے جائیں. اور آخر انہوں نے یہ بھی کہا کہ اس مرحلے پر انہوں نے کہا کہ اب یہ بھی کیا جائے کہ سر شہداء یہ سر نو کے سنا پر لگائے جائیں. مگر جب یہ ہوا تو ایک مرحلہ یہ بھی آیا کہ لعینوں نے یہ کہا آپس میں کہ ایک 6 ماہ کے صغیر ایک بیٹا تھا حسین کا, وہ اس کا سر نظر نہیں آ رہا. کچھ نے کہا کہ ہم نے دیکھا کہ حسین نے خیمے کے پشت پر ایک ننھی سی لحد کھودی اور بچے کو دفن کیا. کربلا میں اشقیاء نے جب سنا کہ انعام ملے گا جو بھی سر علی اصغر لے آئے, اشقیاء گویا اپنے نیزے زمین کربلا میں گاڑنے لگے. ایک مادر خیمہ پہ کھڑی تھی, گویا کہہ رہی تھی اے پار الہا میرے بچے کی خیر ہو. یہ ماں رباب جو بعد از کربلا کوفہ و شام تلک جب وہ یاد کر رہی ہوگی علی اصغر, ان کے دل پہ کیا گزر گئی ہوگی ان ایام اربعین میں. کوئی پوچھے رباب کے دل پہ کیا گزری کہ ایک بچہ کربلا میں ہے, ایک بچی شام میں ہے, حسین غریب کربلا میں ہیں. شاعر نے کیا کہا زحمت تمام کہ موت کی آغوش میں جب تھک کے سو جاتی ہے ماں تب کہیں جا کر رضا تھوڑا سکون پاتی ہے ماں. اور یہ بتا سکتی ہے ہمیں بس رباب خستتن کس طرح بندود کے بچے کو بہلاتی ہے ماں, کس طرح بندود کے بچے کو بہلاتی ہے ماں. اور ایک بچہ کربلا میں, ایک بچی شام میں, ایک بچہ کربلا میں, ایک بچی شام میں, ہاتھ خالی گود خالی گھر کو آ جاتی ہے ماں, ہاتھ خالی گود. اللہ ماتم حسین یا حسین حسین حسین.
یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین حیا علی خیر العمل حیا علی حیا علی حیا علی حیا علی حیا علی یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اماں، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے یہ اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، ذرا پوچھو اے اماں قافلہ سالار سے جا کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے یہ اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، صدائیں آ رہی ہیں واہ حسینہ واہ حسینہ کی، دعا مانگو اے اماں خیریت ہو میرے بابا کی، جسے بھی دیکھتی ہوں پیٹتا جاتا ہے اپنا سر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، میرے بابا کو گر کچھ ہو گیا مر جاؤں گی اماں، کبھی بھی خود کو میں پھر معاف نہ کر پاؤں گی اماں، مزار احمد مرسل پہ جا کر کھول دوں گی سر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، سوائے کالے کپڑوں کے نظر کچھ بھی نہیں آتا، مگر یہ قافلہ نہ جانے کیوں لگتا ہے اپنا سا، کہ جس کو دیکھ کے چلتا ہے میرے قلب کا خنجر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کسی سے پوچھو تو اس حال میں یہ کون آیا ہے، کہاں کے رہنے والے ہیں انہیں کس نے ستایا ہے، مدینے سے تعلق کیا ہے ان کے ہیں کہاں پر گھر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، خدا جانے یہ کیسا قافلہ سالار ہے اماں، گمان ہوتا ہے کہ برسوں سے یہ بیمار ہے اماں، شباہت اس میں آتی ہے میرے بھیا کی رہ رہ کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، مجھے لینے میرا بھیا علی اکبر اگر آتا، میرا دل کہتا ہے اماں کہ پہلے اپنے گھر آتا، نہ رکتا راہ میں تاخیر نہ کرتا علی اکبر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، بڑھاپا آ گیا ان پہ مگر شکلیں ہیں نورانی ہے، اماں بیبیاں لگتی ہیں یہ سب جانی پہچانی، کوئی کلثوم سی لگتی ہے کوئی زینب مضطر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، قیامت آ گئی صغرا نے جب کہ یہ خبر پائی، علی کی لاڈلی پردیس میں ہر ایک کو چھوڑائی، سوائے عابد مضطر کہ نہ آیا کوئی بچ کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس سے صغرا نے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، علی اکبر کا پرسہ جب دیا زینب نے صغرا کو، لگایا سینے سے ہر ایک نے آصف ام لیلا کو، صدائیں گونجتی تھیں گھر میں یہ صغرا کی رہ رہ کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، کہا یہ مادر عباس نے صغرا سے رو رو کر، مدینے میں یہ کیسا قافلہ آیا ہے اے اماں، یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین یا حسین، اللہم صلی علی محمد۔
بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم، سبحان اللہ والحمد للہ ولا الہ الا اللہ واللہ اکبر، اللہ اکبر، اللہ اکبر، اللہ اکبر، اللہ اکبر، اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ، اشہد ان لا الہ الا اللہ، اشہد ان محمد رسول اللہ، اشہد ان محمد رسول اللہ، اشہد ان امیر المؤمنین علی ولی اللہ، اشہد ان علییا حجۃ اللہ، حی علی الصلاة، حی علی الصلاة، حی علی الفلاح، حی علی الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل، الله أكبر، الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله لا إله إلا الله صلاة
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله، أشهد أن محمد رسول الله، أشهد أن عليا ولي الله، أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله. صلاة المغرب يا محسن استغفر الله. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر، وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، الرحمن الرحيم، مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين، اهدنا الصراط المستقيم، صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد، لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأسجد. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمد ربي صل على محمد وآل محمد.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا شديد القوى ويا شديد المحال، يا عزيز يا عزيز يا عزيز، ظلت بعظمتك جميع خلقك، فاكفني شر خلقك. يا محسن يا مجمل، يا منعم يا مفضل، يا لا إله إلا أنت، سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله، أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله، أشهد أن عليا ولي الله، أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح، حي على خير العمل، حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة، قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. صلاة الشمس. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر وما أدراك ما ليلة القدر. ليلة القدر خير من 1000 شهر. تنزل الملائكة والروح فيها بإذن ربهم من كل أمر. سلام هي حتى مطلع الفجر. الله أكبر. سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده.
الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده.
الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد وأرقى وأثبت. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. كذلك الله ربي. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده.
سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده.
الله أكبر. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب إليه. الله أكبر.
سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان الله سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده.
الله أكبر. الحمد لله وخير الأسماء لله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام. السلام. السلام.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم ذو الجلال والإكرام وأتوب إليه. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. يا شديد القوى ويا شديد المحال، يا عزيز يا عزيز يا عزيز، ذلت بعظمتك جميع خلقك، فاكفني شر خلقك يا محسن يا مجمل يا منعم يا مفضل، يا لا إله إلا أنت، سبحانك إني كنت من الظالمين. فاستجبنا له ونجيناه من الغم، وكذلك ننجي المؤمنين. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطيبين الطاهرين. صلى الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله على الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليك يا مغيث الشيعة والزوار في يوم الجزاء، كن شفينا وشفي آبائنا في يوم الجزاء. السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن مسرف الراضي بالقدر والقضاء ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا مولانا يا صاحب العصر والزمان، الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن ويا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان، عجل الله تعالى فرجك وظهورك، واجعلنا من خير أعوانك وأنصارك ومن المستشهدين بين يديك. اللهم كن وليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل الساعة، وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا، حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. شفاء بیماروں کے لیے 5 مرتبہ عما یجib ہم پڑھنے together inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء، 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 أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. رحم الله من قرأ سورة